Please share the information provided in this video. Always remember that a crucial part of removing a person's confusion is understanding his or her unique source of it. Now, we're talking about the consequences of sin today. And more specifically, I'm talking about something that you may have heard your pastor or your preacher say at a church, or someone who used to be your pastor or preacher, or maybe some point you went to church, you heard this from the pulpit. You don't hear it so much from like a regular Christian, not behind a pulpit. But it goes a little something like this. You should not sin, because if you sin, then your sin will have, bad consequences. And you don't want these things, because basically there'll be death, people close to you, poverty, disease, destruction, it could be any variety of things. And the example that's given is typically David and Bathsheba, where, David committed the sin of adultery, sleeping with another man's wife, and then he committed the sin of murder, ultimately to cover it up. And the point that's given is that, the child of the adulterous relationship died, and that was the consequence of his sin. And there was division in David's family and David's kingdom. They look at it and they say his life was never really right again. It was always fraught with family problems and divisions. And so this moral of the story that they give you is, hey, you should avoid sin, or you should, avoid doing something wrong, because if you do something wrong, then these bad things will happen to you. That is what I have a problem with. I don't have a problem so much with saying that, if you do something bad, there's a good chance bad things will happen to you. That's not really, we all get that, No. I have a problem with the notion that you should avoid sin to avoid the consequences, that is a reason for avoiding sin, and this is why. Ultimately, what we're saying is that sin will cost you worldly things, and you should avoid sin so that you can keep or have worldly things. The problem is that every sin that everyone ever does, every evil deed, is ultimately to get worldly things. The commitment to having worldly things is the source of all human evil. To worship and serve the creation instead of the Creator, who is forever praised. So, tempting people with a commitment to worldly things to keep them from sinning isn't going to work, because we all know that this is an unfair world, and that was really the point of the book of Job, that life isn't necessarily on this earth going to be fair. Sometimes people are going to get away with doing bad things, and sometimes they're not. And sometimes you're going to get rewarded for doing good things, and sometimes you're not. And one of the more classic examples is in the New Testament, the apostles are, the guys who did what David should have done, right? But they endure consequences worse than David. But they're doing the good things. They're the way David ought to have been. Look at this is, one of the more famous passages, 2 Corinthians 6, verse 3. Paul, he says, "We put no obstacle in anyone's way, so that no fault may be found with our ministry. But as servants of God, we commend ourselves in every way, by great endurance, in affliction, hardship, calamity, beatings, imprisonments, riots." All those happened to him. There are many times where he was officially beaten as a punishment by the Jews. He said multiple times he received 39 lashes. He'd been thrown in prison. Some of his letters are written from prison. Why was he in jail? He said literally for the apologetic of the gospel. Riots. People would just get so mad at him preaching the message of Jesus, they would just start beating him up in the street. Labors, sleepless nights, hunger. He's on the run. He's trying to not die. No food, hunger. By purity, knowledge, patience, kindness, the Holy Spirit, genuine love, by truthful speech in the power of God, with weapons of righteousness for the right hand and for the left, through honor and dishonor, through slander and praise. We are treated as impostors, and yet are true, as unknown and yet well known, as dying, and behold, we live, as punished and not yet killed, as sorrowful, yet always rejoicing, as poor, yet making many rich, as having nothing, yet possessing everything. And the point is that true righteousness is not when you do it so that you can have a healthy, happy life and avoid the consequences of sin. True righteousness is when you do it because it's right, even though it may cost you. And it doesn't matter what it costs you or if you benefit from it. You do it because it's right. And that's why Paul did it in the story, because he believed in it, even though it did cost him. So that's the problem I have with this teaching, that you should avoid sin because a tree will fall on your car, or there'll be some bad consequences of your sin for someone. Is, they're basically saying it'll cost health and wealth for someone or for you, and health and wealth will be lost. And, basically worldly things. And what Paul, again, I'm not saying I don't want you to be healthy and wealthy, but ultimately righteousness is more important than health and wealth. And we should never use health and wealth or worldly things as bait for righteousness, because ultimately it has to be more important than that. It was more important for Paul and Peter and so many of these guys. Peter and John counted themselves blessed to be worthy of being beaten for the Lord. At that first beating, they rejoiced. And so that's what I want to leave you with. Don't avoid sin because of some consequences. In fact, if you really avoid sin, there'll probably be some nasty consequences. But you do it anyway, because doing good is good in and of itself. You don't need any bait or any worldly things. Ultimately, the whole world is going away. Hope you find this video informative and enjoyable. Thank you for your time.